If you haven't heard of the Lufia games, seriously, what's wrong with you? I'm not even joking. You need to check these out. If you're a fan of traditional Japanese role-playing games, you'll find that this is a pretty solid series, but what sets it apart from other games in the series is the storyline, which is a great tragic epic told in 3 parts. Even though I'm talking about part 2 here, it's really the first part, as it is a prequel to the original. Basically, the first game began with 4 high-level characters fighting powerful bosses. Then it jumps ahead 90 years, and you played as the nameless descendant of Maxim, the main guy you started with. In the second game, you start off as Maxim and build your way up to the ending that was the opening scene of the first game. There was a sequel for Game Boy Color that continued the story even past the first game, and a side story for Game Boy Advance that shows what happens to some of the characters in this one. So if you want to play them in chronological order, you start with this one. And if you simply want to play the best one, you start with this one. Lufia started off as a fairly straightforward RPG. The first game resembles Dragon Quest down to the last detail, but this game branches out quite a lot, adding a lot of puzzles and new gameplay mechanics, mostly related to the dungeons. Although you fight random enemies on the overworld, in dungeons you can see the enemies, and they only move when you do, adding a strategic element. Do you charge in and defeat the enemies, or do you sneak past them, perhaps using one of your items to stun them? Or do you try to attack them from behind, getting an extra turn? The puzzles are innovative and always fun and challenging, even if you played the game before. There's a simple pleasure to playing through the dungeons of Lufia, too, and sure are a lot of dungeons. There's a lot of secrets to find, breakable walls, hidden treasure chests. In a lot of ways it owes a lot to Zelda, almost as much as it owes to Dragon Quest. The characters are more than simple archetypes, being surprisingly developed for a 16-bit game. Characters will join and leave your party, and there are a few deaths to deal with. You know if you've played the first game how it turns out, but if you haven't, you're in for a real treat. The game even fakes you out with a full ending that includes a wedding and a look at a year in the life of after the big bad boss is defeated. Before you realize there's more to the game, you haven't even reached the halfway point. There's also some things that are just thrown in there, but are fun, like the 99-level dungeon and the capsule monsters, which you could raise by feeding them your old weapons. There's even a town where all the items you sold wind up, so you could buy them back if you want, something very few non-PC RPGs have. But of course, I have to talk about the story. It involves the attempted takeover of the world by godlike beings called the Sinestrals. The game is a classic tragedy, with a monumentally sad ending. One character leaves your party out of sheer heartbreak. Entire towns are wiped out by the Sinestrals. The villains have a very real impact on your party and the game world. They're not just faceless bosses hiding out in a tower somewhere waiting for you to show up and fight them, but they actively attack the people that you're attempting to protect. The dialogue is pretty good for a game like this from this era, and although it's not exactly perfect, I was impressed by the translation. You don't feel like you're reading stereo instructions anyway. Some people have criticized the narrative for being a string of fetch quests, and there is some truth to this, but the dungeons are so fun that you'll always welcome an excuse to go through a new one. The graphics are not amazing, but they are serviceable and colorful, and the music is fantastic. My only gripe is that it's not very challenging. It's actually very, very easy, though there are additional challenges to find. The 99-level dungeon turns the game into a dungeon crawler, and a rather difficult one at that. And there's an optional boss that is extremely hard. But the characters and story is why I keep coming back to this one. Not even so much the narrative, but the dialogue and great development of the characters. You really feel by the end that your characters have grown, not just in levels, but as characters. This is one game that I am planning a playthrough for, so if I haven't convinced you by now how great this is, one day I'll get to show you.